moving on to section B, let's get right on with it and let's go straight to the 5-mark question. Okay, so 6A, 5 marks. Let's see what it looks like. So with reference to figure 1, so we're going to use figure 1 here. Explain question, the market structure that best describes the market for UK online streaming services. So let's have a look at figure 1 and let's see if that helps us decide what market structure this is. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so we have 6 large firms. What is this screaming? This is clearly screaming an oligopoly. So how are we going to pick up 5 marks here? I'm probably going to work out the 6 firm concentration ratio for application. So you're gonna have a few knowledge marks, application mark. That should concentration ratio should get you the application mark, and then just explaining why this is an oligopoly. Few large firms dominate the market, and then just explanation. So since we're on the figure, let's just start by calculating the 6 firm concentration ratio. I'm just going to use Q2 of 2021. Basically, all we have to do here, just add them all together, and that would give me 88.2. So that is what I'm going to write. But yeah, let's get started with this question. Let's get started answering it. So this is how I'm answering it. So first, I'm just telling them the market structure. Market structure is an oligopoly. I'm going to then give the application E.G. The 6 firm concentration ratio is 88.2%. And of course, I do need to in fact mention when that 6 firm concentration ratio was. I think it was June, so Q2 of 2021. And now I'm just going to explain why it is an oligopoly. So an oligopoly market is characterized by a few large firms who dominate the market, and of course the concentration ratio does prove that. And here, if you think about the mark breakdown, identification is going to be 1 mark. The 6 firm concentration ratio is going to be 1 to 2 marks. So I'm going to say 2 to 3 marks here, and then this will be 1 mark now, the analysis. So I'm on around 4 marks overall. So I'm just going to add, since the last marks are going to be analysis marks, I'm just going to add general oligopoly, a bit of general oligopoly chain of analysis, just to make sure I'm 100% scoring the 5 marks here. And that is pretty much all I'd write. So these firms are, so just to carry on the general analysis, these firms are price makers due to their large market share, which is attributed to the extremely high barriers to entry, e.g. economies of scale set up by incumbent firms. So basically the price makers, and the reason why they can be price makers is because they have high barriers to entry. And yeah, that's all you need for that 5-mark question. Quite nice, quite a simple 5-mark question. Let's move on to the next question, which is a 10-marker. So with reference to information provided, so this is quite general, so you might actually have to read all the extracts here, but assess whether Netflix subscribers behave rationally. Now that is a good question. Okay, let's get on with answering the 10-marker. So why Netflix subscribers behave rationally? What does it actually mean to behave rationally? It means consumers make decisions to maximize their utility, and that's the main thing. Now let's have a look at the extracts to find which one is relevant with regards to behavioral rationality. So education websites and TV programs, probably not. Economics price discrimination, probably not. How Netflix makes use of behavioral science, sounds very relevant. Let's have a read of this. Because it talks a bit about nudging, autoplay, so that could lead to irrational behaviour. The consumers could become addicted if you think about it. So binge watching, things like that, so that's maybe a bit of a hint. Okay, so if you look at this 3rd paragraph now, so it talks about consumers worried about the rising cost of living and they are turning back on their subscription to Netflix. So what does that tell you? Does that signify rational or irrational behaviour? So consumers realise that, for example, the cost of petrol, cost of food is rising, and so they're prioritising essentials over something that is not essential like Netflix. So that definitely does show they are making decisions to maximise their utility, which does show rational consumers. Then it gives you a few stats on how that is happening, another 2 million forecast. Yep, so basically what it's saying here, especially towards the end, is in lockdown, so 2022, 2021, most people were home due to lockdown. But now, since people are going back to work, they're not spending as much time at home, therefore they don't really need this Netflix subscription, since they're not using it as much, which is 100% rational. And then we have a bit about Disney Plus and how it has higher satisfaction rates. But remember, with your 10-mark question, unless it explicitly asks for 2 paragraphs, you can 100% get away with 1 paragraph. Remember, so 6 KA marks and the 4 evaluation marks. So this is how I'd work. This is how I'd do the paragraph. So first, start by just defining rationality. So like I said, it's where consumers are utility maximizing. And then my main paragraph, my topic point would just be, I believe consumers are acting rationally as they are cancelling their subscriptions. I would then, so my paragraph structure is always state your point, application, then analysis. I would then go on to give a bit of application, maybe give a few stats. Remember, there are obviously 2 application marks here, and then go on to explain basically what I was saying, why consumers, and explain why this shows this rationality. So why consumers are cancelling their subscription. So things like they're going back to work, they're spending less time at home, and then so if they're spending less time on Netflix, they don't get as much value out of the subscription, therefore they're cancelling the subscription. Or that consumers, due to the cost of living crisis, they don't have enough, they don't have as much disposable income, thus they would rather prioritise spending on necessities, things like food, water and rent, rather than spending on more of a luxury good like Netflix. Thus they're substituting away from Netflix, and that is obviously a rational, utility maximising decision. And that would be more than enough for your 6 marks of analysis. Remember, these 10 marks are really simple. You get them done in a question, just make sure you're hitting the market point. So 2 knowledge, 2 application, 2 analysis. Okay, and then we have 4 marks of evaluation. You can literally get away with 1 or 2 maximum evaluation points. Remember, it's all about timing. Here, there's some quite a few good evaluation points. Remember, it's all about this behavioural economics, this behavioural thinking. And if we look back to the start of it, firstly, we talk about binge watching TV shows. You can talk about, however, now of course there are 4 marks of evaluation here, and how would I evaluate? So of course try to evaluate using the extract, and if you remember back to the start of this extract, it talks about binge watching, basically talks about consumers getting addicted, and you could say, however, in evaluation, this depends on the rationality of consumers, depends on how addicted they are. Due to features like autoplay and binge watching, could mean that consumers become addicted to Netflix, thus meaning that of course they're not going to cancel their subscription, even though it might not maximise their utility, even though there is a cost of living crisis. As they're addicted to this good, they may have an inelastic demand towards it, thus meaning they may not act rationally. Or even more specifically, to do with behavioural sciences, behavioural economics, is habitual behaviour. So consumers, as it mentions here, in lockdown, since we were home more, we were consuming more Netflix, more of these streaming services. But due to habitual behaviour, as consumers have picked up this habit, they may continue doing this habitual behaviour, continue doing this habit, and that is obviously irrational. It does not maximise utility, thus meaning, and it works as a really good evaluation point. So 2 evaluation points there. As long as you write them in enough detail, that is more than enough for those 4 evaluation marks. And this is what I'm trying to emphasise. This is how simple it is to score 10 marks on these questions. Just make sure you use the extract, simple chains of analysis, and all you need is 1 paragraph here, 1 to 2 evaluation points, and that is it. And that's all you need for 10 mark questions, and move on. Moving on to 6C, which is an 8 mark question. Let's get right on with this. So with reference to the information provided, so it hasn't given us any specific extract here, examine the likely numerical value of the cross-elasticity of demand between the UK online streaming services. So what is cross-elasticity of demand? Cross-elasticity of demand is of course XED. And XED is of course percentage change in quantity demanded of good A divided by percentage change in price of good B. And what does that mean? Is how much quantity demanded changes of one good in response to a change in the price of another good. Now, this question's been very general. It's saying with reference to all the extracts, basically. So with reference to the information provided. But like I always say, with these, with section B and these extract questions, a lot of the time, the answer is actually quite simple, and you should be able to just know it from your own knowledge, maybe from your own economics theory, but just your own experience living in the real world. And if you recall for this 8 mark question, you have 6 KA marks, or 2K, 2 application, 2 analysis, and then you have 2 evaluation marks. So that will pick you up at least one of the knowledge marks. But now let's actually answer the question. So what is the likely XCD value between these streaming services, so between like Netflix, Disney Plus? I always say this, but a lot of these section B questions, you can answer them just with your own knowledge you have in your brain, basically, with your own economics theory, with your own just reading the news, application, just your own real world understanding. Let's think about this. So XCD value, this again, it relies a bit on your content knowledge. What are the 2 things that it can be? So your XCD value either tells you pretty much if it's a complement versus if it's a substitute. Now, if we think, are these substitutes or the complements? It's a very simple answer. People will subscribe to Disney Plus instead of Netflix. Why? Because Disney Plus might have some shows that Netflix doesn't, or they might like Disney Plus more. They both offer the same thing, thus they are substitutes. And now this relies on your content knowledge. If they are substitutes, what is that XCD value going to be? What is the numerical XCD value going to be? And if they are substitutes, the numerical XCD value is going to be greater than 0. And now, even without looking at the extracts, that is some very simple knowledge that you should be able to drive straight from the question, just from using your own knowledge. And again, it all relies on that backbone of having a solid foundation of content knowledge. So the way I do this 8-mark question, 2k marks, secure them straight away, this formula, and then your other one would just be explaining what XCD actually means. So it measures the change in quantity demanded in response to a change in price of good B. So change in quantity demanded of good A compared to, in response to a change in the price of good B. Then your application marks. How are you going to pick up these application marks? Now this is where, of course, for your section B, you will have to use your extract. So let's just have a scan through the extracts. This is probably not going to be very relevant for this. Economics of price discrimination, probably not going to be very relevant. This is probably it, but for this question, basically, we look for a stat or a figure. So, of course, we have quite a few here. And yeah, so this is talking about market share. And how can we use this to prove their substitutes? So we can use this to prove their substitutes if market share of one increases or decreases. So if the market share of Netflix decreased and by like 1%, and then the market share of Disney increased by 1% in that same time period, that shows consumers are moving from Netflix to Disney Plus, thus their substitutes. So if we find any sort of close relation like that, that'll be a great bit of application. So even straight away, if we look at Netflix and Disney Plus, Netflix lost about 4.5% of market share, and what happened in that same time period for Disney? Disney gained 1.7% of market share. And there's many examples. I'm sure there's better example here. So 5.5% Netflix lost, Disney gained around 2.3. So yeah, they're definitely substitutes. As I said, when one loses, the other one gains. And if you remember back to the previous questions, we looked through this extract, and this mentions a bit of, it proves why they're substitutes. So here it talks about declining satisfaction, declining value for money for Netflix, and then here it talks about Disney, higher satisfaction rates, rankings, then Netflix across shows, more original content. So just yet again, any one of those, and this is the main stat I would use, by the way, for this question, to pick up those 2 application marks. Just show when Disney Plus's market share is increased, when Netflix market share is decreasing, we see an increase in Disney's market share. So it shows consumers are moving from Netflix to Disney Plus. And that would be my 2 application marks, just like I said, adding those stats and figures. How would we get those 2 analysis marks then? It's just explaining what substitutes are, using the application we've just given and explaining what that means, basically. That when consumers go away from Netflix, they go towards Disney Plus. And you can even use that extract. So you can talk about how demand changes. As consumers are not as satisfied with Netflix, therefore thus decrease the quantity demanded on Netflix. And since Disney Plus provides a better service, better value in the eyes of consumers increase the quantity demanded of Disney Plus. Thus, it does show that substitute relationship. And that's literally how simple the 8-mark question is. Of course, we still need to go through evaluation, but 6k marks, so easy, and you could be so time efficient with this as well. So you need to, it's just a banker. It's the bank question where you need to bank it. You need to make sure you're getting 8 out of 8 on this question. So with evaluation here, it's 2 marks. Just be simple, straightforward. Not much development needed here. First one that comes to my mind is just another content knowledge point. Like I say, content knowledge mastery is key. This is why I emphasize so much in my live classes. But how am I picking up these 2 marks? So a really good point is it depends on the XCD value itself. Yes, we've proven that the XCD value is greater than 0, but again, content knowledge is key here. There's degrees of the substitutes as well. For example, if the XCD value is 0.2, what does this indicate? This indicates they are weak substitutes. Whereas if the XCD value is something like 0.8 or like 0.7, whatever you want to call it, they are stronger substitutes. So however in evaluation, this depends on the value of the XCD, as although they are substitutes, it depends whether they're weak or strong substitutes. And what I would actually do, just to add that little icing on the cake, is when we talked about the differences in the market share. So we said, for example here, where Netflix fell 4.5%, but Disney did not gain 1.7%, it indicates that they are actually quite weak substitutes rather than strong substitutes. So it indicates a lower XCD value maybe, and that's a really, really good evaluation point. And it's a lot more than you need for 2 marks, but you can pretty much write that down in a minute as well. And like I said, strong content knowledge, knowing how to evaluate, bing bang bosh, that is 8 out of 8 marks, box. So 12 marker, with the reference to extract C, so giving us a specific extract, we love to see that. Discuss the likely private and external benefits. So as soon as I read that, what am I thinking about? That big topic, the second biggest topic in Edexcel Economics, the second highest yield topic in Edexcel Economics, which is market failure, of course. Discuss the likely private and external benefits of viewing educational websites and TV programs. Okay, so taking a deeper dive into this, so it's talking about the private and external benefits. if you talk about the private and external benefits, and we know it's talk about market failure, and again, it's a 12-mark question, what am I thinking? Firstly, it's private external, because it's benefits, it's definitely something to do with positive externalities, and positive externalities has a diagram, doesn't it? So that is probably how I'm going to, definitely going to include this in this question. It's basically, it's telling you to include it without explicitly stating it. So discuss the private external benefits, so basically a positive externality diagram, viewing educational websites and TV programs. Now, let's just break this down into private and external benefits. So what is the difference between the private and external benefits? So if you think about the price mechanism, of course, again, it's just content knowledge, but private benefits are basically just benefits to the person themselves, so the GCSE student who's consuming the content, and then external benefits are the benefits to the whole of society. So what are the private benefits? Why would you go, it's like why are you watching this video? It's literally a perfect example, but the private benefits of you watching this video is, we'll say in terms of A-Level Economics, you will get better grades. So you will get better grades. What does better grades mean? Why do you want better grades? Ultimately, let's think about like the overarching goal. So you want better grades. Why? Because you probably want to go to a good university, a good apprenticeship. But overarchingly, you want to have a good job that makes good money. So you want better grades to increase income. But now let's think about the benefits to society of you becoming more educated. If you are more educated, there's lots of benefits to society. Like firstly, educated people, it lowers the crime rates. Since if you're educated, you're less likely to throw your life away and go kill someone, because you understand the ramifications. You have a career, you probably have a family that you know that maybe you have to provide for. So you're less likely to do stupid things. You're less likely to hurt people. Thus, it means that lower crime rates. Thus, why we see lower crime rates in developed countries rather than less developed countries. Then, just the more simple things. If you're more educated, you will probably make your future employer more money. So, but let's go even before that. By becoming more educated, what does educated mean? You have more skills. If you have more skills, you can talk about like human capital, and with better human capital, you're more productive. So, increased productivity. And if you're more productive, and everyone that goes to university, everyone that becomes educated is more productive, it means we have a higher skilled workforce, or just a more productive workforce. And of course here, you would obviously have to pick up your application marks. So let's have a look at extract C, which is this extract. So education websites and TV programs. Let's just find anything that backs up basically the benefits of these programs. So firstly, they're free. That means, I guess, what does free mean? If you think about demand, it means that if you think about the inverse relationship of price and quantity demanded, it means that of course there's going to be a lot more demand due to price being free. Therefore, what do we usually say when price? Just think about it in the way, because free. I remember when this came out, this paper, it confused a lot of students, because if price drops from £2 to £1, what do we usually say? We say that consumers are better off. Why? Consumer surplus increases. It's literally the exact same thing. If things are free, there's a massive increase in consumer surplus, since it doesn't cost every single consumer is going to be experiencing surplus. So yeah, that's definitely one point you get to also talk about. A private benefit is that consumer surplus increases. But yeah, what else does this say? So they're written by teachers and subject experts. So I guess like it says, it's more reliable, and yeah, the government are investing into it. So Oak National Academy, and obviously, honestly, I've never heard of that, but I've heard of Bite Size, but never Oak National Academy. But ministers have set aside 43 million to fund it. I think they should fund 43 million for my economics videos. But yeah, the application is a bit simple here. There's not really much that jumps out to you. But yeah, it's again, you have to basically use your own, like we planned here. You need to use a bit of your own thinking, and these will just basically just get you the application marks. But like I said, we would be drawing a big diagram here, so which is some of you may know it as just the positive externality diagram. Technically, it is a positive consumption externality diagram, but it doesn't really matter whatever you call it. So let's get started with drawing this. So of course, a positive consumption externality, supply equals marginal private costs, and since we're talking about the benefits, we're talking about private and external benefits, and this would also equal marginal social costs, since we're not focusing on the costs here. Now we have our demand curve, so demand equals marginal private benefit. So that means now, remember, this point here is our market equilibrium. But since in positive consumption externalities, the external benefit is greater than the private benefit, we have another curve which is our marginal social benefits. And now let's get this labelled up. So let's get these points labelled up. So what does this represent? this is QSE. So of course, where marginal social benefit curve intersects our marginal social cost, we call that the social equilibrium. So let's get that labelled up. Oh. And then what is this black point? This black point, of course, represents QE, which is just the private, well, it's just the market equilibrium. But what is the theory behind this positive consumption externality diagram? So we have the market equilibrium, which is of course here, and we have the socially efficient equilibrium, which is QSE. But why is there a discrepancy between these? And this is again just content knowledge, since consumers will consume at the market equilibrium. So without government intervention, we will consume here. And why do consumers consume here? And let's use the education example. When you're in school, maybe when you're doing your A-Level Economics, you are only thinking about, yet again, your private benefits of better grades. Maybe that will get you into better university and therefore a better income later on. But that's the problem. As a consumer, you only think about your private benefits. And the big thing you don't think about are the external benefits. You don't think about the benefits to society of you getting more educated, thus meaning you underconsume education. So you only think about your better grades, but if you thought about the vast variety of benefits to society, like lower crime rate, like we've written here, increased productivity, better skilled workforce, more tax revenue for the government, etc., etc., you would consume education more. Thus, this is why there's this gap of the triangle of welfare loss, which is, of course, just here. Just share that in. This represents the potential welfare gain if consumers consume more. Like, for example, that is a prime reason why there is a minimum age of leaving education. For example, you're legally not allowed to leave education below 16. And this is because if you do leave education before 16, before you're 11, the government knows there's massive loss in that potential welfare gain, where if you became more educated, like, let's just think, a student who leaves before completing his GCSEs versus a student who goes on to complete a university degree, who is more likely to commit a crime? There's a massive opinion that it's going to be the person who's left before doing his GCSEs, because probably had a tough upbringing, probably a harsher background. But this is the reason why the government wants to promote these individuals to consume more education, become more educated, as with more experience in like the workplace, surrounded by professionals, they're more likely to become a professional themselves, thus increasing outcomes for society. But just a tip again for all these externality diagrams: how do you work out where this welfare loss triangle is? You go from your market equilibrium. What is your market equilibrium? Where supply equals demand. So where do these two intersect? Let's go down from supply, and this is where demand is. So from the market equilibrium here, you go up or down to your socially efficient curve. And where's the socially efficient curve here? The curve here is above, so you go up, and now that is your welfare loss triangle. And only other things I would label on this is the gap between these two. What does that represent? It represents the underconsumption, because, like I said, consumers underconsume education, for example. Okay, so breaking this down into paragraph by paragraph. So for this first paragraph, of course, split into private versus external benefits. So how would I word this? The likely private benefits of viewing educational websites and TV programs is that it will lead students to have better grades, thus reaching their overarching goals of better income. Then I would go to the extracts. Let's try to find something that backs this up. Monthly visitors. Then just explain how this happens. So the private benefits can be seen are where demand equals marginal private benefit. So basically the free market equilibrium, you can even label that on if you want. Free, I'm sure free market, FME, obviously write it in your exam, free market equilibrium. But this can be seen as a free market equilibrium as when consumers consume more of these free educational content, they're likely to learn more. If you learn more, they like to score better in their exams, therefore receive better grades. And it means that with better grades, this a bit of a chain of analysis of how the pathway to university works. They go to better universities, better apprenticeships, so end up earning better, higher income. And then you can justify why it is a private benefit, as consumers that are consuming this good are benefiting directly from the consumption, because themselves, the students themselves, are benefiting. They are benefiting from consuming the good. I would probably do this is, I think you can speak a lot more about the diagram in the second paragraph. So I'm going to make a massive second paragraph, but the first one might be a bit less theory based. Now, with regards to evaluation, this question is slightly dull for, well, this part of the question, the private benefits, is slightly dull for evaluation. But let's just think about it. So we're saying that there's lots of benefits of students consuming education online. But what actually happens, think about yourself. So you're watching this A-Level Economics video on YouTube. What can sometimes happen when you're actually watching A-Level Economics videos and you look at your suggestions? You might see like a KSI video and you might click on that, so you may become distracted. Or a lot of times, even though on this channel, there's pretty much everything you need for an A star. Have you gone through the entirety of this channel? No, because there's, you can say, compared to like your school, there's almost like there's a lack of structure and you don't have enough motivation. It relies a lot on your personal motivation to go through all the videos, to pay attention to all the videos, for example. So a great evaluation point saying you can even talk about the addiction of these, the PED values, or the addictive nature of these electronic goods. So however, in evaluation, the degree of the private benefits depends on the addictive nature of electronic devices, as due to like YouTube or these websites they're consuming this education on, they may become distracted, they may have a lack of motivation, thus reducing the degree or reducing the benefits of reducing the potential of the private benefits. Another one, a bit more of a technical one, is to do with the diagram itself, and it's to do with how hard it is to actually measure these welfare gains or these welfare losses in cases of negative externalities. But in reality, these students are consuming these websites and they may be getting better grades, but there's no tangible way to measure that. There's no tangible way to measure the students who are getting better grades due to consuming the website, or maybe students are getting worse grades due to consuming the website. There's no way to measure the benefits, the private benefits, and the external benefits, so it's a bit weird. It's hard to quantify it. Okay, and for the second paragraph, the external benefits paragraph, I would word it something like, I believe the likely external benefits of viewing educational websites and TV programs are several benefits such as increased productivity, better skilled workforce, and things like a lower crime rate. Give a bit of application from the extract, basically whatever you didn't use last time, anything you want to use, but anything to back it up. And then how would my chain of analysis go? I'd probably just actually kick off by using a bit more of the diagram, because I want to include a lot of diagram theory here. And by the way, when I was labeling the diagram, I forgot one label, which is of course the external benefit. It's just a gap between your marginal private benefit curve and your marginal social benefit curve. But how would I word this? I'd probably say something like consumers underconsume, like the thing I said before. They underconsume at the market equilibrium, thus leading to they miss out on the potential welfare gain at the socially efficient equilibrium. As if we consume at the socially efficient equilibrium, for example, more people become educated, it means that there's better human capital, better skilled workforce, and basically just leading to all this. Means workers are more productive. If workers are more productive, it makes firms more money. That obviously has benefits in themselves. You can basically go a million routes here. If workers are more productive, they're more skilled. They can provide more for their family, better living conditions. The government has more money, they can invest, etc. There's basically a million things you can say. More education, lower crime rates, better living conditions, again, better living standards, just good stuff. And with regards to evaluation for this question, for this side of it, for this paragraph, I would probably say something like time lag works really well here. However, it depends on how the external benefits depend on the time frame. As in the short run, it's going to take a long time for the external benefits to be translated into society. Why? If you improve the level of education of GCSE students or even primary school students, it's going to take nearly 20 years for you to see something like increased productivity, lower crime rates. As, for example, if a student's in their SATs, they are like, I don't know, 10. And by the time they get a job, they become established, maybe buy a house, they're about 30. So it takes about 20 years there, or whatever time period you can say. It takes a long time, basically, to see these external benefits. So you can say, however, it depends on the time frame. Or time frame, instead of using time frame, you could say, depends on time lag. Another valuation point is, of course, classic opportunity cost. Spent 43 million on online services. If we just reinvest that into some normal in-person schooling, maybe it would actually lead to better benefits, a better society outcome. Now, a classic thing I get with Edexcel Section B in my live classes is that students don't feel satisfied in their answers. They don't feel like they're hitting enough economics marks. And it's just kind of how Section B goes in Edexcel Economics. They don't actually ask you that many deep theory questions, besides sometimes a 15 marker. Sometimes it's actually quite a good theory question. But your only usual big theory questions are the 25 mark questions, where you really can show the examiner how much you know about economics. As a lot of these questions, they literally just scratch the surface. They want you to show a bit about it, but you don't really need that much. And it annoys a lot of students, but just for the students who may be thinking that, just don't worry and you'll be fine. Moving on to the 15 mark question. So using examples from figure 2 or extract B, so it's given us 2 to refer to, discuss the likely impact of price discrimination on a firm's profits. Use relevant diagrams. Now, the reason why I laughed there is this is an absolute classic question and great for revision. As look through past papers, wherever this is assessed, it's always the same question. price discrimination can pretty much be only assessed in one way. There's slight variations of how they word it, but the key theory they're assessing you on is exactly the same. So once you've got this 15 marker boxed, you've got like a model answer for it, you're perfect. And if you get this in the exam, you should be laughing. You should be very happy, since it's a very good question to get and a really easy one to get full marks on, since it's literally the same question, slightly reworded whenever it comes up. Let's get started with what price discrimination actually is. It's where firms charge different groups of consumers different prices for the same product. And that just exemplifies the entirety of price discrimination. Now, and the question is asking us, what are the impacts of price discrimination on a firm's profits? And this is all, again, it's all economics theory, but it leads back to the classical economic assumption, which is what? Firms are profit maximizers, and a way they can further that objective, a way they can make more profit, is by price discriminating. So why do they do it? It increases the firm's profits. So that is basically answering the question. What is the likely impact of price discrimination? The likely impact is that it will increase a firm's profits. But then, this is how you pick up the 50 marks, you're proving how that happens, how price discrimination increases a firm's profits. And the best way to do that, and this is why I said, once you know this model answer, you can pretty much smash any single price discrimination question, is using the diagrams. So this is a bit unique. They have a bit of a weird, it's a bit of a unique one, is how I'm going to call it. You have 3 diagrams you need to draw here, and we will do a bit of an explanation for each of these. So the diagrams themselves are very simple, but they help explain very well the theory. So let's get started. So I'm going to label 1 elastic, 1 inelastic, and 1 total. So whenever I teach price discrimination in my live classes, the easiest way to do it is the UK's example of train tickets. So as you know, as you might know, is train tickets in the UK, there's 2 different prices. They both get the exact same experience, the exact same good. You're both just going on the train. Nothing is different. Besides, under 16s and over 16s pay different prices. So it perfectly fits that definition. Different groups of consumers, so there's 2 groups here. There is under 16s, over 16s, different prices for the same product. And like we said, why do firms price discriminate? Because it increases firms' profits. So let's try to prove why this works. So if we think about under 16s, these are usually students. These individuals have, the easiest way to put it, they have less money. And since they have less money, very simply, they are charged by train firms lower prices. And what's the economics behind this? And what's the economics behind price discrimination? The way firms group consumers is based on their PEDs, is based on the elasticities of demand. And for example, in under 16s, they 100% have elastic demand. And what does elastic demand mean? It means consumers are very responsive to changes in price. As if you imagine, you're a student, some of you can probably imagine this. Your parents give you £2.30 each day for the train ticket. Now, if one day that train ticket went up to £2.50 since the train line increased the price, you literally only have £2.30. Thus, it means you're a very elastic demand consumer, since any sort of change in price, any increase in price, you can no longer demand that good. So it decreases your quantity demanded. And what does that mean? It means you're very responsive to a change in price, which is exactly what an elastic demand consumer is. Now, over 16s, we say they have more money. So if you think about people with jobs, maybe a 30-year-old, a 50-year-old, he won't have £2.30 in his bank, he might have 23,000 in his bank. Now, if you have more money, it means that now firms charge them a higher price. And let's break that down into the economics again. So they split groups of consumers into their elasticities. Now, these over 16s will have more inelastic demand. Why? Let's think about a scenario where one day they're on the train platform and the price is gone from £2.20 to £2.50. Since these individuals have more money, like I said, they have lots of money in their bank, the change in quantity demanded is going to be insignificant, since consumers, they're just going to pay the higher price since they can afford to pay it, since they have the money to pay it. Thus, it means, what does this mean for the train firms? So these consumers can afford to pay higher prices, so train firms charge them higher prices. So like I said, let's contrast them. That student who only has £2.30, if prices increase, he literally cannot get the train since he only has £2.30. Whereas an adult who's going to work, yeah, if the train price increase from £2.30 to £1.50, he probably won't like it, but it's not like he's not going to catch a train for that reason. So therefore, inelastic demand as why they're not very responsive to changes in price, and that is exactly what inelastic demand is. And why does this help firms make more profits? Since it means that they can keep both groups of consumers happy. So by charging £2.30, it means that the cheaper the under 16 consumers could afford it, and of course the inelastic demand consumers, the over 16s would afford it as well. Whereas this is where the problem is. By charging £2.30, yes, we have the elastic demand consumers, but we're missing this potential here. We know, and the trade firms know, they can charge these inelastic demand consumers higher prices. So they're missing out on that potential profit by splitting the consumer base into two consumers, elastic and inelastic. They can charge these under 16s £2.30, but then they can make just a bit more profit from these guys. They can maybe charge them £3, and as they know they're inelastic, they can make a bit more profit from them. So basically, by charging one price, they're not maximising the potential profit they're making from the inelastic demand consumers, thus leading to overall less profit. Okay, enough of me speaking. Let's show this on the diagram. So, how would we draw this diagram? Now, this is actually a very, very simple diagram. Once you learn it and once you understand it, you should just remember it. On your axes, it's price, quantity. You can put cost, revenue, quantity. It's fine, but so we have elastic, inelastic, and total. And like I said, total is if a firm is not price discriminating. And elastic is just how you would expect it. It's just a shallow demand curve. I think that's how you describe it. And yeah, so D equals AR. So you just draw an elastic demand curve, and then you would draw like you always do, a MR curve, which is twice as steep. And that's all you need to do for your elastic demand. And what does an elastic demand curve look like? If you think back right to the start of year 12, it's quite steep, isn't it? So this is how an inelastic demand curve would look like. So D equals AR, and like I said, same thing, you would just draw an MR twice as steep. So total is the only one with a bit of variation. And like I said, it's if the firms did not price discriminate, if they charged all groups of consumers one price. I'm going to draw it out and then I'm going to explain it, but maybe just looking at it, try to see what I'm doing. So then at that point there, it juts out. And why is that? So at that point there is where the elastic demand consumers come in. Since if you look at that, it's basically there. So what we do is basically we're inelastic, because look, at this prices, there's only inelastic demand consumers. And then when we reach this point, there's now elastic demand consumers, so the point juts out. So you're inelastic, and then when you reach the point where there's elastic demand consumers, it kind of juts out and it becomes an elastic demand curve. And that's your D equals AR, and same rule follows for your MR. It's just twice as steep, and then same thing, it juts out. I think juts out's a word, I'm not actually too sure, but I'm pretty sure you get what I mean. So like I said, keep going, and then we have the elastic bit, so bang, so like that. Okay, and now what you can do is just draw a nice little horizontal line, and this would now represent, you call this MC, it's a marginal cost. So basically, like I said, we're kind of making it into cost and revenue diagram, and you can also, they do also accept, you can say MC equals AC here, which means now, well, with the MC also, you can show how the profits are, and then you can comment on the profits. So let's just focus on these. Let's focus on elastic. So just as always, MC. Also, it depends how you draw these diagrams. Like for example, on the iPad it's a bit hard to draw them. So I'll explain what I mean. But so let's just find the profit maximization point. So the price. So where would we find that? Of course, where MC equals MR. So MC is obviously this line here. But where MC equals MR, this would mean this is P max. And now this is the box super profit, and then let's move to inelastic. So where MC equals MR is this point, and now let's find the box of super normal profit. Bang. So super normal profit, and then Pmax, and then let's find the box super normal profit here. So where MC equals MR, which is at that point here. Now what you can actually do here now, as a last step, you can add a horizontal line. And now what is this going to represent? This red horizontal line is going to represent MC, and you can also say MC equals AC. So now you can show the profit maximization price, and also you can show the profit, the supernormal profit also. So how would we do this? So like we said, this is MC equals AC. So where is profit maximization is where MC equals MR. So where MC equals MR, which is at this point here, and then you go up from there and then go left, which would of course be P max. And now this would be your box of supernormal profit. And don't worry, I will explain what all these means. Then we have inelastic, and where's profit maximization? It's at that point there, and of course you follow the same rule. You go up, go left, and this is your box of supernormal profit, and then of course that's your P-max price. And lastly, let's find out for total. So like I said, this is if a firm is not price discriminating. So where MC equals MR is at that point there, you go up, and this would be your box of supernormal profit and P-max. So this is the main point. So now what I'm going to try is, there's not much space to write, but A plus B. Okay, so there's a lot writing here, but I'm just going to label these boxes now. I'm going to label this A, I'm going to label this B, and I'm going to label this C. So I'm going to write A plus B is greater than C. Now, what does that mean? So this is talking about the respective boxes of supernova profit. This is stating that if a firm price discriminates, so like I said, these two diagrams show when a firm price discriminates, this shows when a firm does not price discriminate. So it's essentially saying if a firm price discriminates and charges different groups of consumers different prices, they're going to make more profit than if a firm does not price discriminate. And that is essentially your answer to the entire question. And that is how you just back that up with the theory I explained. So why is that? Since inelastic demand consumers, they're less responsive to a change in price. Therefore, as you can see, you can charge them a higher price here compared to the lower price of the elastic demand consumers. Whereas, as we can see, in total, you have to charge them basically the same price as elastic demand consumers. So you miss out on that potential gain, that potential profit that you're missing out from inelastic demand consumers, since you're not charging them a high enough price. And that is a hell of a lot of theory. Another little thing that comes to my mind in terms of KA marks and knowledge marks, one thing you can also write is just a few nice knowledge marks, is there's a few conditions for price discrimination. Well, there's 3 specific conditions for price discrimination. One of them, of course, is market power. So a firm needs, it's like monopoly power basically. A firm needs to be able to change its prices without losing all its consumers. So for example, if the firm does not have enough market power and it increases its price for inelastic demand consumers, if all consumers just substitute away, of course that's not going to help increase its profit. So the first condition is a firm needs to have a degree of market power or market share. Big one. And the second one is information. So a firm needs to actually be able to split its consumer base. So it needs to know which consumers are elastic versus inelastic demand consumers. Since they need to make sure they're charging inelastic demand consumers inelastic demand prices. So if you charge inelastic demand consumers elastic demand prices, obviously you're not price discriminating and you're losing out on profit. But then also, and it works in evaluation, it depends how a firm splits its consumer base, as sometimes elastic demand consumers can be charged inelastic demand prices, so worsens things like inequality. So that's also a great evaluation point. But the third and the final characteristic of price discrimination is that you need to be able to limit reselling. So for example, on trains, if an over 16 an adult was able to purchase a child's ticket and get away with it, it would obviously mean that they're not price discriminating effectively. But of course you can't do that, since if you are found doing that, you do get fined. So that is a way they limit reselling. But yeah, of course, for this question, since it's asking you to refer to figure 2 and extract B, let's have a read of extract B, is to do with price discrimination. Instead of using the train tickets example, you would just use Netflix here. So of course, this was explaining just general theory, but since it's a 50-mark question, of course you need those application marks. Remember, it's 9 marks KA here, so 3 knowledge, 3 application, 3 analysis, and then 6 evaluation. So to get those 3 application marks, you would just use the extract. So it's told you to look at extract B, and if you look at the bottom of this extract, it tells us basically the exact same example we've been talking about train tickets. It shows Amazon Prime. So students receive 50% off. So like I said, students, just because they're younger, it's literally the exact same example. The younger, they have less money for the exact same product. They get the exact same benefits of Amazon Prime. They just get charged less. So literally same example as train tickets. And even here, we see a different type of price discrimination where Netflix are splitting their consumer base between countries. So countries with higher incomes like America, UK are charged higher prices, whereas lower income countries like India are charged lower prices. 100%. Here, since you've been given extracts, do not use the train ticket example. Use the extract example. I would just do Amazon Prime. It's the easiest. It's literally exactly the same as train ticket. Moving on. So that's pretty much more than you need for the 9K marks. I've just explained it very in detail there. But so of course there's 6 evaluation marks here, and like I always say, use the extracts for evaluation. So it says figure 2 or extract B. We've had to read through extract B. It's a decent extract, but let's have a look at figure 2 here. So first thing that pops into mind here, what is the definition of price discrimination? You charge different groups of consumers different prices, but for the same product. Now, if you look at the top here, what is the difference here? So there's Ultra HD versus non-HD. But this is actually not price discrimination. Why? Because these groups of consumers are paying different prices for different products. So that's not price discrimination. Now, you could argue technically this is second degree price discrimination, but this works perfectly as a valuation point, saying that since different, it doesn't align with the classic definition of price discrimination, since different products are offered basically. So this is not actually price discrimination. Now, a great one is how we said one of the characteristics of price discrimination is you need to be able to limit reselling. So basically stopping inelastic demand consumers, like over 16s, paying elastic demand consumer prices. So like a adult gets a child's ticket. What's a classic thing that happens with Netflix? Does everyone pay for Netflix? Not really. Things like sharing passwords. So that you could say price discrimination incentivizes things like sharing passwords. Maybe something like a classic thing people do. They get, if students have it cheaper, they'll get like the younger cousin, their sibling to sign up for something, but they use it themselves. So you could actually say by a firm price discriminating, it's actually reducing their profits. And like I said before, even other points like it actually worsens inequality, as if they don't split their consumer base correctly, it means that elastic demand consumers are charged inelastic demand consumer prices. Now, if you look at the question, it's saying how price discrimination affects a firm's profits. But you could evaluate saying how there's many other components that will affect a firm's profits. Like, for example, a massive one is going to be just the income of the country or the GDP of the country. Why? Since if national incomes are falling massively, since I think we mentioned it in a previous question. So the rationality question, since a rational consumer is going to prioritize necessities over something like Netflix, so that could have more, so the state of the economy could have more effect on a firm's profits rather than if a firm is price discriminating or not. But of course, there's lots of different points you can evaluate this 50-mark question for. We've gone through a few of them briefly, but yeah, I hope that helps with these 50-mark questions. And like I said, if this is maybe even set a reminder, but a few days for your exam or just as general revision, 100% revise this price discrimination question. As this comes up, you definitely want to be prepared for it. You want to have a decent model answer where you can just almost rattle it off, as it will really help you secure those higher marks.